So the Sixth Extinction was, I thought, pretty interesting of a book in general. It started off talking about the Panamanian golden frogs, in South America and how they were kind of dying off from this fungus that was not compatible with the frog species. Um, this fungus was spreading insanely rapidly, and the reason that it was spreading was because of humans. We, from our emissions and how we have been living, it's causing temperatures to rise globally, and this kind of creates like a breeding ground for that species of fungus, and it's just giving that fungus the perfect environment to spread, and cause that sort of destruction with the Panamanian golden frogs. Um, the next chapter, talking about the mastodons, was, um, to me, slightly less interesting. I did think it was interesting, just the whole concept of how humans discovered that extinction was a thing. Like, they didn't have any grasp of that idea beforehand. Um, they they George Cuvier was kind of comparing the mastodon, the fossils that they found, to other living animals, living species at the time, and he was kind of using process of elimination to rule out that it wasn't any of these living species. Like, during that time, it was actually a species that had completely died off, which wasn't really, like, a lot of people didn't think that was an option back then. That's why they were so focused on trying to figure out what animal it was. But when they couldn't figure that out, George Cuvier kind of decided that it was a species that no longer lives. And obviously now we have dug up plenty of fossils, most famously the dinosaurs, that showed like how extinction is kind of just part of the world. Not necessarily what it is right now, how humans are causing so much more extinction than normal, but just in general, like it happens for species. Um, Chapter 3 talks about the original penguin. This chapter I found pretty interesting just because of, it was kind of the first mention of basically an invasive species. We could be considered an invasive species because we showed up to these penguins' habitat with other predators, that we introduced, and it just depleted the penguin species entirely, rapidly. Like, there was nothing they could do. They couldn't evolve around it. It just happened like that. Like, we weren't there, and then we were there, and they were gone. That's kind of what happened. And now we've been seeing that globally, like every year, or almost every year, we've been seeing species go extinct. Um, Chapter 4, the Ammonites. I found this to be pretty interesting because these are creatures from prehistoric times that lived with the dinosaurs, that we're still seeing them around like today. It's also the first mention of oceans, which I'm very interested in anything that has to do with the water or fishing. Um, so I definitely found this chapter pretty interesting. Um, the Anthropocene epic for chapter 5. This is the epic where humans and humans' actions and lifestyle is shaping or kind of changing the direction of the future for Earth. Um, like past epics, it's been a pretty, not necessarily streamlined, because there's been 5 major extinction events, like up until now, but it's been more of a direct line with maybe some slight altercations or that have occurred, that now it, up until the Anthropocene epoch, we kind of see this diverging path that is happening because of humans. Um, you know, we have all these emissions. Our species is rapidly growing, evolving, spreading, um, and not intentionally, but it's causing havoc for all these other species. Um, Chapter 6, the sea around us. This one was I found pretty interesting too, and I've heard a lot about coral reefs, specifically the Great Barrier Reef um, in Australia. How the percentage of coral reefs either completely dying off or just shrinking is pretty much 100% of coral reefs are being affected by humans. Maybe we're not directly harming them, but indirectly through our actions, we're definitely causing a decline in coral reefs, which is pretty devastating for oceans because coral reefs are like one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world. Like up there with rainforests on land as a comparison. Um, and our carbon dioxide emissions are kind of what's causing that. Like the waters are warming up, the waters are becoming slightly more acidic, which is just not the coral reefs aren't able to thrive like that. Um, Chapter 7, dropping acid. It's similar, but the acidic waters are kind of causing not just coral reefs, but in general, um, marine ecosystems all over the world, like even lakes, ponds, streams, rivers, anything like that, it is being affected by slightly more acidic waters, which marine life just doesn't. It doesn't. It's not compatible with that. I mean, they're fighting a losing battle trying to survive like that. Um, Chapter 8, the forest and the trees. This is kind of one of the more familiar topics that I have. Just I feel like this is probably true for everyone. Like we're a little bit more educated on what's going on with deforestation, but if we're talking about rainforest, for example, they're I mentioned earlier they're one of the most biodiverse ecosystems like you could possibly have. Um, they're the amount of species that they're crucial for is uncountable almost. And by cutting down trees and trees just dying, it it's really limiting how a lot of these species can live. I mean, just in like they're not going to be able to live if they don't have a habitat to live in. Um, it's really this one kind of started to put into perspective how much of an impact that we've had. Um, while I was reading throughout this book, I would become interested in a certain topic and look up, just do some research on how much of an impact that we've had, and it's pretty mind-boggling that the amount of forests that we have cut down. I mean, I've seen some camps where people have set up to they would live overnight, they would sleep, wake up, cut down as many trees as they could, and then repeat. That was all they would do. Most of those operations have been not shut down, but they have had regulations put on them to kind of limit what they're doing. But it's you can't just magically. The good thing is that you can plant trees and they can regrow, but that's something that's going to take time. And with how much space and buildings we're taking up, we're not going to be able to just do that like overnight, and it's not going to be the full like a full restoration. It's just not. Not that it's not possible, but it's just not something that's going to happen with the way that we're living right now. Chapter 9, the islands on dry land. This is up in the Andes Mountains. And this I found pretty interesting. So the tips of a lot of the mountain ranges are sitting kind of above the clouds. And with temperatures rising, it's kind of inching these species up the mountains until they have these like small little miniature ecosystems sitting on top of where those clouds are at the tip of the mountains. And a lot of the times species, there's nowhere else to go from there, so they just have no choice but to die off. Like there's nothing really they can do once there's nowhere they can go. It's kind of one of those harsh realities. Like even if we stopped today, it's gonna take so much time for the Earth to kind of recalibrate and fall into that balance that is able to sustain all this life. But right now, the way that we're living with all of our emissions, basically, it's a cascading effect that all these species are just gonna die. There's nothing they can do, and eventually, like I think I mentioned this earlier, something like that could happen to us, like with the fungus and the Panamanian golden frog. Like eventually, something a lot like that fungus, the effect on the frogs, there could be something that has that same effect on us. And when that happens, what are we gonna do? Like if we can't figure out how to change the way we live, then we're all doomed basically. And then life on Earth is, I wouldn't say the whole life is doomed, but there's definitely, we're in the middle of a huge extinction event. I mean, there was almost no life after the dinosaur extinction. There is very, very little life left, and it took millions of years for Earth to get back in order where it could sustain life properly. Which, I mean, is kind of the way we're going right now. It's not looking good for us. Chapter 10, New Pangaea. This kind of interested me because back when all of our continents were one supercontinent, every species was just kind of spread throughout there. And then once Earth spread out into 7 separate continents, it kind of broke apart. There was a connection that was broken between these species. So it kind of allowed for new species to develop and evolve over time, and it allows for separate ecosystems, like all these ecosystems to be spread out by oceans, like hundreds of thousands of miles, hundreds and thousands of miles, and that kind of gives humans the opportunities to travel and introduce new species, take away species, kind of do that to other places, which could have like kind of let the equilibrium fall off balance a little bit, and that kind of can create another like cascading effect where certain species aren't able to survive. Chapter 11 is specifically talking about rhinos and how they it's titled Rhino Gets an Ultrasound. This is one of humans' methods, technology, efforts, whatever you want to call it, to conserve life that is kind of dying off. I mean, just in the past 5 years, I can think of one, at least maybe two species of rhinos that have died off. Like I know that rhinos in general, like a lot of their species, are kind of on the decline, along with a lot of other species. But they're one that's just an example of humans kind of putting forth an effort to conserve that life, conserve that species, in hopes that we can kind of change something, like the way we live, our lifestyle, to keep those species going. I mean, as of now, it kind of seems like a lot of these species are almost doomed. But it's good to see that there's a solid chunk of our population that is putting a lot of effort into saving these species. After that, we have chapter 12, the madness gene. This one's more focused on like genetics and the biology of life, how it's living, and all that. The genetics are what makes a species. Like it's crucial in how species survive in their traits. And when there's altercations to genetics, that's when species are. It's just devastating. Like there's nothing they could do if they are inherently changed and not capable of living the way that they need to live. And that's kind of like we've seen that. Like humans are now able to manipulate DNA and their genes and change the way that they are, and we've seen that if you change the traits that species have evolved over millions of years, that they need those traits to survive. There's a reason that they have those, and if they're not there, or if you implement a new trait that gets in the way of how they live, they're not going to be in a good place to survive or have a good chance of survival. Finally, the thing with the feathers, this chapter, I felt like kind of summed it up pretty good, showing that humans have had a direct impact on species going extinct. Passenger pigeons, everyone's heard of them, but we've never seen them, and it's because humans rapidly caused their decline. I mean, hunting and loss of habitat both just made this species go extinct in like record-breaking time, like we've never seen before. And this was, I believe, another like eye-opening experience for humans, where there's things that humans can do that can really doom another species, but there's also ways that we can kind of conserve or have a conserving effect on species that we really gotta hone in on and focus on. And I think that this book kind of just overall put into perspective like the effects that we're having, and how our lives in general are not sustainable for life, or like the human species lives are not sustainable for life. Like I've seen, as a fisherman, I've seen a lot of regulations specifically on bluefin tuna, highly regulated species. This year actually they shut down recreational fishing for them, which I find interesting because it's not the recreational fishing that is causing the problems. It's commercially, boats that are out there for weeks on end that are killing hundreds of them at a time, that are depleting their, and they're still those boats are still allowed to fish, which I think is opposite. But that's kind of the way that humans have been living for this past 100 years or so, which we're seeing is now taking a toll on the earth in general. So I think that humans kind of gotta take a look at themselves in the mirror, see what's going on, and just change the way we're living, making sure we're more sustainable. We're able to get Earth going back in the right direction. So, thank you.